Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update, analysis and further synopsis of what has gone on in Poland as Russia, while attacking Ukraine with quite a lot of drones and a fair few missiles last night. We'll get onto that in my next video, the hits and losses video. While that was happening, a number of drones entered Polish airspace, and we now understand that was at least 20 drones, according to many. Certainly, at the minimum, 19. That's, I think, the Polish president saying that, and looking like it could well have been 20 or more, with a number of these being shot down. So these, at the time, we were hearing that there were at least 5 drones, and we heard sort of 6 to 10, 8 to 10, around 10 drones, and then more and more seem to have gone through into Polish airspace as the night went on. Cities under threat, so it was being reported at the time, were Chełm, Zamość, Lublin and Rzeszów. The airport was closed in Rzeszów. I think 4 airports might have been closed in the end. So this is a really big thing. And we're going to see, last night I did a breaking news update video where I said, Russia, scare quotes, attacks Poland with drones, because we have 3 options here, really. One, the Russians made a mistake and their drones accidentally went into Poland. 2, Ukrainian electronic warfare was responsible for sending these drones off course and into Poland. Or 3, this was done on purpose. And if it was done on purpose, then you have 2 elements of 1. Were they full? Did these drones have munitions on board? And I'm not 100% sure that is the case at the moment, because every drone I've seen that's been grounded doesn't seem to have exploded. And we know that a lot of drones that are sent into Ukraine on a nightly basis lack warheads. Sometimes they're reconnaissance drones, sometimes they're decoy drones. So the question is, how many of the drones that went into Poland had warheads on? What was their purpose? If it was on purpose, what was their function? Was it to gather intelligence? Was it to test out the air defense systems in Poland? Was it to push the envelope sort of politically, so on and so forth? Or was it an actual attack? Were they trying to actually blow things up? Can we see reconnaissance or intelligence gathering project as an attack? So that's why I put attack in scare quotes, because I wasn't really sure, and I think that's absolutely fair. Right. So during the night's attack on Ukraine, several Russian drones, actually it turns out that more than 20 now, went deep into Polish airspace. And you have Polish Air Force F-16s, Dutch F-35s, you had Romanian planes that were up, you had Italian and Dutch sort of AWACS and refueling planes. There were planes from an awful lot of NATO countries doing their thing. And we understand at least some drones were shot down. So here you can see a map of the drone routes here. Kiev was very much targeted, but also Lutsk, Ivano-Frankivsk and Lviv. And then in Poland over here, and you can see movement of drones. Now, the way we understand it is if drones are interfered with electronic warfare, that they would just continue a straight line. I was sent an update from one of Zhenya's sources. So Zhenya and Greg Terry, I've gone around to Ukraine with Zhenya once and met up with him a second time in Ukraine. Right now, he said there's very active push around the areas, Shahed 136s that enter Poland. There's active push around the idea, so that this is being pushed by Russians, that they were under the influence of Ukrainian electronic warfare, and that Ukraine is to blame for the incident. Interestingly, the narrative being actively promoted by Russian platforms, which are integrating this theme into Poland's information space, including using the Polish language and Polish social media accounts. They lack nuance, though. Yes, Ukraine uses electronic warfare to suppress Shahed 136s, but in that case, the drone loses control and flies straight without changing its flight path, maneuvering or altitude until it runs out of fuel and crashes, or until it is shot down, or until it leaves the suppression zone, catches a satellite signal, or returns to the target. All drones that entered Polish airspace were constantly maneuvering and did not try to return to Ukraine. In other words, their targets were initially set on Polish territory. Moreover, electronic warfare suppressing Shahed 136 at a distance of over 50 kilometers. Are you serious? And a bit of insider info along the trajectory set by the Shahed 136 drones. Many more drones were flying. Initially, the total group was over 20, but some were destroyed by Ukrainian air defense and some broke through into Poland. Therefore, today the armed forces of Ukraine were protecting not only Ukrainians, but also Poles in the literal, not figurative sense. It is obvious that Russia is trying to achieve several goals simultaneously with this provocation. First is to test NATO's resilience. Second is to strike targets on the territory of one of the alliance countries for the first time in more than half a century. I'm not sure that second point is definitely the case. A key logistics hub for Ukraine. I don't know whether they were definitely actually going to blow stuff up in Zhezhou, but who knows. Third goal is to sow discord between Ukraine and Poland. Russian occupation forces have started not only an unprecedented campaign to discredit Ukraine tonight, but also the hot phase of the hybrid war against NATO. And then another analyst that Eugenia sent me says, I also fully agree with Informed Napalm's views. So these are hacktivists who work on behalf of Ukraine. That if there is no response, Russia will accustom Poland and neighbouring countries to disruptions in aviation operations. So if NATO is scared about doing anything, if Poland is scared about doing anything, then you've pushed the envelope. This is moved that red line, and they're like, okay, you're accepting us disrupting you in different ways. This is part of hybrid warfare. We'll continue to do this. Now the line is back over here. We'll be operating right up to that line until we push that line further again. And it's like a lobster boiling in a pot, because it's not like turning up the heat straight away. I'm burnt. I'm going to react to that. It's like slowly raising the heat until before you know it, you are boiling. So adding from myself, says this source, this will concern not only Poland, but all countries bordering Ukraine. Main goals: project their own power onto countries, influence an influence an important logistical element without using strike means of influence, using simple dummies, even without explosives. Here, Russia's electronic warfare will also play a role, strategy tested in Ukraine, when with the help of electronic warfare, they simulate air targets. Remember Kaliningrad, which previously just jammed aviation communications. Now it can create fake threats. Remember the exercise in Belarus, create pressure on Ukraine through other countries as they face danger because of us. This may pose a threat to Ukraine's overall Ukraine's supply logistics routes. That is, they will need to be pushed back overall. They will temporarily create inconveniences and delays. This is exactly the minimal window for a future Russian strike on the front. Every logistical closure multiplies transit costs. Russia wants to normalize chaos for Europe and systematically erase red lines for itself. The goal may be to push NATO infrastructure and forces away from the borders, which is quite logical. Another dimension is intelligence on NATO's defense procedures. Every incursion is a measurement of fighter jet scramble time, detection and interception corridors, strike zones and seams between Polish, Lithuanian, Slovak and Romanian air defense and control chains. The key strategy is managing the red lines. Moscow constantly plays on the edge, insert dummies, unknown origin drones, low altitudes that reduce radar visibility, and legal definition of armed attack. This way they can develop a precedent where NATO increasingly remains in the corridor of Article 4. So Article 4 is not, Article 5 is like, NATO members are going to come to the military aid of other NATO members. Article 4 is we are going to discuss what's going on. We're going to return to Article 4 in a second. This is where formal consultations between NATO countries takes place in order to work out what's going on. And Poland has been calling for Article 4, I think, over this incident. But it avoids Article 5, which is the collective defence. Interesting observations there from Zhenya, or his sources. Now, various analysts have been putting out different maps. Like this one has been used a number of times to show that they just couldn't have been electronically interfered with these drones because the pathways are too... they are maneuvering too much in the Polish airspace. So that makes you think that it's probably done on purpose, and therefore what was the desired outcome? Poland has apparently shot down Russian drones For the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion, a NATO member country came under direct attack when Polish forces intercepted Russian drones violating national airspace, says the Euromaidan Press. So different agencies and different people talking about these drones going to Polish airspace in different ways. Poland shot down 4 out of the 19 drones that violated the country's airspace overnight, said the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. For the first time during a war, he said the drones did not come from Ukraine, whether as a result of errors, disorientation, or small-scale Russian provocations. So he gives all 3 options there. For the first time, a significant part of these drones entered Poland directly from Belarus. So this is interesting. We're hearing that a lot of them came from Belarus. Now, the Belarusians have actually talked about this and said, meanwhile, Defense Ministry of Belarus says it was them who informed Poland about the drones. So there was some forward planning there, or there's at least some advance warning from Belarus to Poland about this. It was thanks to them that Poland was able to react. Belarus also claimed that the drones have drifted off course due to electronic warfare. So that's what Belarus is saying. The ministry's representative claimed that some of them were shot down over Belarus. But of course, electronic warfare only has so much of a range. And some of these drones were found an awful long way into Poland. So, yeah, I mean, some will claim that if they lose contact with their operators or are interfered with, then they can just carry on flying in a straight line. So it depends how the interference is working. But here we have Tendar saying at least 20 drones crossed Polish territory, and at least 4 different points the drones came down. The Russian attack on Polish soil is no accident, he says. It is a test, and the reaction of the West will determine if this kind of deliberate strike will continue or not. It proves once more that appeasement towards Russia only leads to more terror and eventually war, says Tendar. Now, we can see some were very close to the Polish border that came down, and we'll look at some of these images in a second. And one was an awful long way back, 250 kilometers, it's thought, from the Ukrainian border. That is a very long way. So Moscow had been preparing drone attacks on Poland since July, using Polish and Lithuanian SIM cards in drones, according to Defense Express. Polish authorities were warned about test connections to their mobile networks. The likely goal was to gather intel on Poland's air defense systems. So one of the theories is that they have Polish SIMs in them, as we know that that's been the case in Ukraine, to the point where Ukraine was starting to mess around with their mobile phone towers to therefore send the drones, because they use the mobile phone towers as kind of, trigonometry, trying to work out exactly where they are in Ukrainian airspace by knowing that Tower 1 is over there, Tower 2 is over there, Tower 3 is there, and Tower 4 is there. So if I'm here and I know those towers are there, then I know that I'm here. And I can use that to navigate myself around. So what the Ukrainians started doing was changing, as far as I understand this very simplistically anyway, it started changing the information on the tower. So it would, so instead of that being 1, 2, 3, 4, that was like 7, 9, 14, 23. And that really confused the drones, and the drones ended up flying back into Belarus quite often. That seems to have stopped as of late. But that was one of the tactics that the Ukrainians were using to counter the use of drones with SIM cards in them. Now, this appears, at least as some are claiming, to be a case of Russian drones having Polish, maybe Lithuanian SIMs in them to be able to piggyback on the mobile networks in this case Poland, to navigate their way around Poland. We'll see, I guess, whether that ends up being true. This is apparently footage showing a shoot down of a Russian drone. CCTV, and you can see the explosion taking place there, but it was kind of on fire a little bit before. That is apparently one of the drones getting taken out in Poland. And then we have damage to a Polish home after a Russian drone crashed into it. Meanwhile, Polish Prime Minister Tusk calls the incident a massive provocation, but insists there's no reason to panic and that life will continue as normal. Talks with allies are ongoing. So he doesn't call it an attack, but he does call it a provocation. Here are some drones from Poland. So That's one I think that was maybe 250 kilometers behind the border. This is that house, I think, that was hit. I don't know whether that was a drone being brought down onto the house or just coming down onto the house. There's not enough information as of yet. This one was a Gerber drone, which has a military number as well, was found in Poland. It crashed near Sulejał in Mniszków, Opoczno County. Struggling there with the Polish ones, which was 265 kilometers from the Polish border. So that is even further west of Warsaw or Warszawa. So serious stuff here. Another Russian Gerber drone. That one says it was discovered in Szyznovka, Lubelski Voivodeship of Poland, 25 kilometers from the Belarusian border, 65 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, so likely to come across from Belarus. Operational Command of Poland's armed forces has said that the operation in the country's airspace has been concluded. Russia has not been mentioned, although Prime Minister Tusk has named the drones attacking Poland as Russian. I realise how complicated this situation is for Poland and NATO, says Anton Gerashenko. Poland is an ally of Ukraine. Peace is a fragile thing. Russian social media this morning is full of statements like, shit, has it already started? Hello, World War III, and onwards to Warsaw. We'll bring them back into their native harbour. Lately, Russia launches an unprecedented number of drones at Ukraine, actively threatens Finland and the Baltic states, pushes the topic of the Suwalki Gap, which is the gap between Kaliningrad and Russia, weapon rattles or saber rattles at the Russian-Belarus training. So they're doing this SAPAD 2025 training thing in Poland with a large number of armed forces personnel and equipment. Poland closed its border with Belarus as a result of that. Putin has stated that Russia knows no borders. Putin is checking for reactions and limits. Their absence pushes him towards new steps. Kind of what was being said before. Now, Poland shot down multiple drones that violated its airspace during this attack, or whatever you want to call it. They called it an act of aggression. NATO was alerted, airports were closed, and flights were diverted. And there is the Polish statement that came out at some point overnight. You can read that. We thank NATO Aircom and the Royal Netherlands Air Force, whose F-35 fighters helped ensure safety in Polish skies tonight. So there was NATO cooperation there. Now, the Ukrainians, this is Mikhailo Podolyak, presidential advisor, says that Russia deliberately and strategically attacked Poland with drones. The goal was to test the West's response system, to shock Europe, and to normalize the idea of war spreading across the continent. I think all of those are eminently plausible, and simultaneously as well, I think all of those can be true, and all of those probably are true. Poland is considering invoking Article 4, which would officially bring an urgent issue to the North Atlantic Council. That's according to Polsat News. NATO's first reaction, though, was Poland was not attacked. It was a large-scale provocation. So this is a NATO spokesperson saying numerous drones entered Polish airspace overnight and were met with Polish and NATO air defences. Secretary General of NATO is in touch with Polish leadership, and NATO is consulting closely with Poland. So a large-scale provocation is a kind of mealy-mouthed way of getting around calling this an attack. Kaja Kallas from the EU said last night marked the largest violation in European airspace since the start of the war in Ukraine. Putin only wants to escalate the war. We have Representative Joe Wilson from the United States saying Russia is attacking NATO ally Poland with Iranian Shahed drones less than a week after President Trump hosted President Narotsky in the White House. This is an act of war, and we are grateful to NATO allies for their swift response to war criminal Putin's continued unprovoked aggression against free and productive nations. I urge President Trump to respond with mandatory sanctions that will bankrupt the Russian war machine, yes, and arm Ukraine with weapons capable of striking Russia. Putin is no longer content just losing in Ukraine while bombing mothers and babies. He is now directly testing our resolve in NATO territory. Putin stated that, quote, Russia knows no borders. Free and prosperous nations will teach Russia about borders. So a response there from an American politician. We've got Poland's government, according to no reports, will hold an emergency meeting at 8 o'clock this morning. That's already will have been and gone by now, according to a spokesman. Spokesperson Prime Minister Tusk says he has informed NATO Secretary General Rutte and remains in constant contact. 4 airports were closed. What else? Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs has summoned a temporary chargé d'affaires of Russia, so they are summoning Russians as you would expect. And then we have, so the latest, I'm going to go to the Guardian live blog. So Polish airspace was, quote, violated by a large number of Russian drones, says Tusk. Last night, the Polish airspace was violated by a huge number of Russian drones. Those drones that posed a direct threat were shot down. I'm in constant communication with the Secretary General of NATO and our allies. 7 drones, remains of a missile found so far, according to the Polish. Egregious, unprecedented violation of Polish NATO airspace, says Keir Starmer. So the UK's Prime Minister said this morning's barbaric attack on Ukraine and the egregious and unprecedented violation of Polish and NATO airspace by Russian drones is deeply concerning. This was an extremely reckless move by Russia and only serves to remind us of President Putin's blatant disregard for peace and a constant bombardment of innocent Ukrainians that the innocent Ukrainians face every day. I've been in touch with the Polish Prime Minister this morning to make clear our support for Poland, and we will stand firm in our support for Ukraine. My sincere thanks go to NATO and Polish forces who rapidly responded to protect the alliance. It's very much NATO speak here from Starmer. With our partners and through our leadership of the coalition of the willing, we will continue to ramp up pressure on Putin until there is a just and lasting peace. Now, Starmer's absolutely right here. So an extremely reckless move by Russia. I can't for the life of me think that this was a good idea by Russia unless, as mentioned, NATO and Europe do nothing. If they do absolutely nothing, then Russia have succeeded here. Now, what does nothing mean? If this prompts Europe to ramp up even greater sanctions on Russia, then that is something. There needs to be an escalation of something against Russia here. Otherwise, they learn that this is acceptable and they continue doing stuff like this, and that envelope has been successfully pushed. So, yeah, talking about the drone 250 kilometers from the border, Ursula von der Leyen responded, Putin's message is clear and our response must be clear too. We need more we need more pressure on Russia to come to the negotiating table. We need more sanctions. We are now working with a 19th package in coordination with partners. We are particularly looking at phasing out Russian fossil fuels faster. Really good news on this. By the way, I'll talk to you about that later. Hungary are going to possibly start buying hydrocarbons from Shell rather than from Russia. The shadow fleet and third countries. And at the same time, we need more support for Ukraine. No one has contributed as much as Europe. Close to 170 billion euros of military and financial aid so far. More will be needed. I like this. This is a statement to the US, as no one's given as much assistance to Ukraine as Europe. Not the US. US, you might keep saying you do, but no. It's not only... it should not only be European taxpayers who bear the brunt of this. This is Russia's war, and it is Russia that should pay. Just today, we have seen a reckless and unprecedented violation of Poland's and Europe's airspace by more than 10 Russian drones, she said. Lots of support from European leaders. So Emmanuel Macron says the attack was simply unacceptable and condemned it in the strongest possible terms. I will soon speak with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. We will not compromise on the security of the allies. Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof called it unacceptable and a further proof that Russia's war of aggression poses a threat to the security of Europe. I'm glad that Dutch F-35 fighter aircraft were able to provide support. The Netherlands stands shoulder to shoulder with its NATO ally Poland. So that's really good. Ireland's Michael Martin strongly condemned the violation of Poland's territorial integrity, calling it reckless and unprecedented act. That is a stark reminder of the threat posed by Russia to Europe's security. Finnish Prime Minister Orpo said Poland had to resort to exceptional measures to protect the airspace from Russian drones. Poland has Finland's full support. Antonio Costa from the EC, European Council, said we stand in full solidarity with Poland following Russia's unacceptable violation of airspace, Russia's continued aggression against Ukraine, and reckless airspace incursions into EU member states pose a direct threat to the safety of all Europeans and to critical infrastructure across our continent. Poland is right to take necessary steps to defend its sovereignty. Europe is increasing investment in its defence because peace and security in Europe cannot be taken for granted. Now, Poland is a recipient of something like $45 billion worth of European support for air defences in Poland. I think some huge amount of money on these, what's called the SAFE, I forget what SAFE stands for, but the SAFE project entity, which is to help secure Europe as a whole, but by putting money into Poland to support Europe on the eastern flank. So flights have resumed. Poland summons a chargé d'affaires. Tusk says the first signals from NATO members show the understanding of how serious the situation is and the importance of continued support for Ukraine in this context. He stresses Poland's support for Ukraine in its war with Russia, saying this is also fundamental to Poland's security. Now, part of why I think this is a ridiculously bad choice from Russia is that places like Poland, where you started seeing PIS move slightly towards a confederation. So PIS are the Law and Justice Party. They are a populist right-wing party, but they have been against against Russia and for Ukraine. But they're also Eurosceptic. Tusk's coalition government are Europe-looking, so Western-looking, pro-NATO, pro-EU, and pro-Ukraine, much more overtly. PIS pro-Ukraine, but interesting positioning, more populist, but they've been moving closer and closer to some of these other far right parties like the Confederation, like Razem, is it? Who are pro-Russia. And so you start to see public discourse in Poland start to move away from overt support for Ukraine. And some of the polls are showing less and less support for Ukraine. So Russia doing something like this in Polish airspace will surely only increase support for Ukraine among the Polish electorate, and that is completely counterproductive to what Russia was already achieving. So I just think this is I don't quite I know all of those reasons about pushing the boundaries and doing this and doing that. You are going to solidify European support for Ukraine by doing something like this. I just don't get it. Tusk warns prospect of military conflict is, quote, closer than at any time since the Second World War. He warns that last night's violations are part of a broader security picture, with Russia and Belarus set to hold aggressive military exercises later this week. There, quote, there's no reason to claim that we are in a state of war, but the situation is significantly more dangerous than all previous ones. And military conflict is closer than at any time since the Second World War. Poland will invoke Article 4 of NATO to consult on a response to the threat, Tusk says. So this is important. An article reads, the parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. Sorry, that's Article 4, not an article. That's Article 4. So they need to consult together. And you would assume that NATO will consult, but Article 4 is quite a formal thing. So if Article 4 is invoked, then that is an escalation. But Tusk says that while he appreciates all expressions of solidarity, the words are not enough. Poland will request a much greater support from NATO allies. So obviously that's going to be an influx of, you would think, money into Poland and resources into Poland to help Poland be on the vanguard there, I guess. So incredible night last night. PM Tusk is briefing Parliament on last night's violation of Polish airspace. Just incredible stuff last night. And I don't think that this was a sensible move from Russia for all of the aforementioned reasons. Extremely dangerous. European leaders condemn Russia after drones shot down over Poland. I think this will just create a more solidified unity of support for Ukraine. And you saw a pretty strong response from NATO, as in, you had tankers in the air, you had AWACS in the air, you had various NATO forces flying their planes. As Kaya Kallas says, Russia's war is escalating, not ending. We must raise the cost on Moscow, strengthen support for Ukraine, and invest in Europe's defence. The EU plays a major role and will support initiatives like the Eastern Border Shield defence line. So that's kind of what's happened. What about Zelensky? He said a total of about 24 Russian drones could have moved into the airspace of Poland. Our air defense forces have destroyed more than 380 Russian drones of various types, at least 250 of them Shahids. Ukraine is ready to expand our cooperation with partners for reliable air defense. Russia must feel the Europeans know how to defend themselves. serious stuff. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm sure more on this will emerge throughout the day, and I'll get on with my hits and losses video. Thank you so much for your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.